Halloween is one of the most uniquely cinematic holidays out there. Sure, there are Christmas movies and I don't know, probably a Thanksgiving movie or two, but the horror genre itself is pretty much synonymous with Halloween. And everyone has a different movie or movies that have become Halloween viewing traditions, and you can't really run out of options. Monsters, aliens, ghosts, serial killers, self-aware reflections, classics, modern hits, and horrible failures are all part of getting in the cinematic Halloween spirit. And for me, every time I hear the word Halloween, one movie comes to mind. Beetlejuice. Now, I'd be lying if I said that I love this movie as much as I do on its merits alone. Nostalgia plays an enormous part. This was the Halloween movie on TV. You know the one, it played every October 31st on one of the 3 channels that had cartoons you watched. So you sort of slowly absorbed it without ever really knowing the plot or characters, and it just sort of existed as a series of images and sound bites in your head. Or maybe that only happened to me, I don't know. Either way, there are so many moments from this movie that are just seasonally burned into my brain. I can ignore my repressed Beetlejuice memories for a good 11 months per year, but once the pumpkins come out, I'm listening to the Banana Boat song at least once a day. Oh. But this year I tried to look beyond my usual nostalgic enjoyment of this movie and dig deeper into why I love it so much, and I found quite a bit more than I expected. First of all, and I'll just get this out of the way now, I'm not a huge fan of Tim Burton's work. I never really have been. His increasingly generic output of children's movies across the past... Oh my god, Alice in Wonderland came out 9 years ago. How old am I? Okay, his output across the past decade, I guess. That's weird, but it didn't exclusively cause me to think this. I just never really got into his style when I was growing up, and I still don't find it that interesting now. That being said, I do appreciate the unapologetic weirdness he brought to the table in his early career, and this film is certainly no exception. It's weird. Its weirdness is, in a way, a sort of smokescreen for how simple the story really is. When you break it down, it's really just a haunted house movie from the perspective of the ghosts, with a distinctly satirical take on that genre. The movie starts out quirky and innocuous. We meet Barbara and Adam Maitland. They seem like the perfect couple. They live in a small, idyllic town. They're having a vacation at home, and everything's going just great until they get in a car crash. A car crash that contains this shot, aka the best shot ever committed to film, but when the Maitlands return home and try to leave their house, they end up in a mysterious desert crawling with giant sandworms, nobody else can see them, and they find the handbook for the recently diseased.
Deceased.
Basically, the movie wastes no time getting to my favorite aspect of the story, which is the ghost mythology. I don't know what it is about taking something supernatural and turning it into a bureaucratic process, but it's always really funny to me, and I feel like it's a critically underused idea in satirical stories. I love the aesthetically and comedically inventive ways that the movie approaches representing the afterlife and the minutiae of trying to quote-unquote survive it. In particular, I love the brilliant visual gags, like the flat guy, the guy hanging from a noose being pulled across the ceiling, and Juno, the Maitland's caseworker, smoking through her slit throat. I will say that some aspects of the ghosts are questionable from a logical standpoint, like why do some ghosts look hideously deformed or wounded and others look normal? If you can control how you look as a ghost, including removing and reattaching body parts, why does anyone choose to be in half or flattened? Why do ghosts adhere to the laws of physics but are also incorporeal? Why are some ghosts green or blue or just skeletons? Seriously, why are these guys just skeletons? Does that have to do with how long you've been a ghost? Why does that guy still have a shark on his leg? Is that the shark's ghost? And then I realized there's probably some weird, complicated subsection in the handbook that explains everything, but it's written like this.
Geographical and temporal perimeters. Functional perimeters vary from manifestation to manifestation.
Also, I would unironically buy and read a full version of that handbook if it was real. I also love how this movie approaches ghosts as a comedic concept. It's incredibly funny to me to think of ghosts being incompetent at scaring people and having to learn how to master the omnipotent abilities that ghosts always seem to have for some reason. It brings a certain ironically human tone to the afterlife. And even though these aspects of the story are played for laughs more than anything, because Beetlejuice is primarily a comedy, the movie can still be effectively eerie and off-putting when it needs to be. A lot of that comes down to production design and the magnificent practical effects, which also sell a lot of the visual gags. I have a special place in my heart for stop-motion creatures, and every one of them in this film, along with the makeup and costuming, is just fantastic. So fantastic that the film won an Oscar that year for makeup, which I just learned and am very happy to hear. There's also a very ethereal quality to the lighting, with very effective stylistic color choices. Everything about the afterlife just feels so off, but not quite scary, which is how the film feels overall. Again, that early Tim Burton weirdness. What really sells this unique tone is the score by Danny Elfman, which is one of my favorite scores by him. Every time the movie starts and I hear that theme over the sweeping shot of Adam's model, I just feel so happy and jazzed, but the exorcism scene is legitimately creepy and haunting. I'm not totally sure how I arrived at this metaphor, but this movie looks and feels like a theme park haunted house ride, especially when the Maitland's house is transformed into Tim Burton's dream home. It's the right blend of spooky and fun, atmospheric and energetic. It's not quite horror, it's what I would call the Halloween spirit. The cast also really sells that spooky and fun tone. Everyone is perfect. The standout is, of course, Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice, and it still surprises me every time that it's actually Michael Keaton. His energy is just so specific in this movie. I don't think anyone else could have quite captured it. He steals the show immediately and forever when he appears, but never really overshadows the other performances, just complements them perfectly. Geena Davis and an almost unrecognizable Alec Baldwin do a great job of portraying the confusion and frustration of being suddenly dead and trying to cope with their world changing around them without being able to affect it at all. My favorite performances are from Catherine O'Hara and Glenn Shaddix as Delia and Otho, embodying the pretentious, overbearing New York City art scene. And, of course, there's the dog. That dog sure is cute. There's also a young Winona Ryder who's playing a sort of prototype Billie Eilish. It's a very pre-Disney Tim Burton character.
We're dead.
I want to be dead too.
No.
This movie's more relatable than I remember. But even the way the story unfolds in terms of a haunted house movie is unique and creative, again because of that satirical approach. It's hilarious to see ghosts having to adjust to being ghosts, but the relationships between the living and the dead never fall into cliches.
Open this door, you dead people, or we'll bust it down and we'll drag you out by the ropes you hanged yourself with.
Didn't commit suicide.
It doesn't matter.
The contrast between the Maitlands and the Dietzes is perfect. They all play off each other so well, with Lydia as the intermediary, and you get such a clear sense of who every character is with one look at their costumes. My favorite part of the story is when the Maitlands finally figure out how to scare the inhabitants of the house, and Charles Dietz just goes full 80s businessman and tries to find a way to monetize the ghosts, and eventually wants to turn the entire town into a paranormal museum, which is such a funny take on the genre because of course someone would just try to get rich off the discovery of the afterlife and not run away screaming. I also love the relationship that develops between the Maitlands and Lydia, which makes perfect sense considering the beginning of the movie establishes the Maitlands don't have kids and Lydia may be as close as they ever get in death. And through it all, Beetlejuice himself exists as this constant chaotic force. He's not even in the movie that much, but he always reappears at the perfect time. When he's finally unleashed, the movie just goes absolutely insane, right up until a giant sandworm breaks through the ceiling and eats him, which I guess kills the ghost. You know what? It doesn't matter. This movie's climax is goofy, victorious, and completely unique. It's the perfect ending for this story. And the final scene with the Maitlands and the Dietzes coexisting as the living and the dead, an unconventional but complete family, never fails to make me sing along.
Jump in the line, rock your body on time. Okay, I believe you.
Because of its ongoing cult status and a pretty resilient legacy among fans, it always surprised me that there was no sequel to Beetlejuice. And it turns out there almost was one, it was just stuck in development hell for decades. And sure, there was a cartoon and a musical, and Winona Ryder recently said that a real sequel was in development, but at this point, I doubt we'll ever see it. It's been long enough now since the original film came out that I feel like any modern sequel or soft reboot would just be a scene-by-scene rehash. The wonderful practical effects would be replaced with CGI, and I doubt the creative spirit of the original would shine through, especially if Tim Burton came back to direct it. Also, I don't know if I'd want to see current-day Michael Keaton trying to do Beetlejuice shtick. I'm sure they'd bring him back, but that would just be weird. As the original film stands, though, I absolutely love Beetlejuice. I still watch it every October, and it surprises me every time by just how well it works. It's unapologetically goofy, clever, original, heartfelt, and has only gotten better with time for me. Also, it's a point of intersection between so many distinctly 1980s film things that we'll never see anything quite like it again, but I sure would love to see a modern equivalent. In terms of satire, mainly due to the unfortunate undervaluing of comedies in Hollywood right now, we don't really get genre-inspired movies of this quality a lot anymore, which is a shame. Instead, we get wonderful films like The Spy Who Dumped Me, and Stuber, and The Happy Time Murders.
I want to be dead.
So all of that is why Beetlejuice is my favorite Halloween movie. Not only because it reminds me of my childhood experiences on the holiday, or because it's kind of spooky, but because to me it embodies the classic feeling of the Halloween spirit. Every holiday brings out a different emotion, a different atmosphere among its participants, and nothing captures the Halloween atmosphere better than this movie. I always just want to watch it with a packed room of friends, in costume, eating candy on Halloween night. But on the other hand, if I want to have a panic attack, I can just rewatch Hereditary, so all of my Halloween bases are covered. So, those are my thoughts on Beetlejuice, my favorite Halloween movie. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, feel free to give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more. And let me know in the comments, what's your favorite Halloween movie? What do you watch every October with your friends? Or alone? I won't judge, some people just don't have friends. Thanks again, I'll see you next time, and happy Halloween.